Hello class, welcome to POL255 Introduction to International Relations. Once again, as I've stated elsewhere, it's my great pleasure to be your instructor for this class. Now the video that I'm going to show is going to talk about both the welcome to week 1 to welcome to week 5 announcements, the weekly the welcome announcements, and the instructor guidances for each week. These should be viewed as essentially as your class lecture notes. They should be the first thing, when you first think about how am I going to complete assignments for a week, they should be the first thing you look at. And I'm going to help show you why. Now, while there are times when they may not cover everything, you should always check them first, because oftentimes they are organized and structured in such a way that they will essentially address what in the course materials you should look at. So you might have course materials that cover several chapters, cover 100 pages, 50 pages, 70 pages. They might have a report that's very dense and detailed. And what the lecture notes, the weekly guidances do, is they help point out things that you should look at, where things are, and what you should study and get at. With that in mind, the other thing is that for the first week, we have an extensive discussion of specific examples, specific points about different theories and so on, as well as videos in the Welcome to Week 1 announcement. So the Welcome to Week 1 announcement gives you a number of videos that you can watch to introduce you to things, but it's also vitally imperative and important that you also read the instructor guidance for Week 1, which sort of lays out in detail the different theories that we're going to cover, which are realism, liberalism, and the identity perspective, as well as how they can be applied. And it addresses both the Week 1 assignment, which looks at the rise of China and specific implications with that, as well as how to explain and think about the different theories in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, the theories of realism, liberalism, and identity. And with that in mind, I'm actually going to kind of scroll through the Week 1 instructor guides, because I think the videos on the Welcome to Week 1 announcement are pretty self-explanatory. And I'm going to give you some headings and talk about a few of these headings to give you an idea on why it's so important to always look at the weekly announcements and the instructor guidances every week before you get started. Now I do this long kind of detailed introduction to the post-year introduction section. Here I kind of go into it, I really unpack it and so on. I probably do it more than I should. You don't have to put as much as I do, but it is important that you read what I suggest you do and then try to get at it. In terms of the DQ for this week, which addresses the strengths and weaknesses of realism, liberalism, and the identity perspective, it's a great thing to do, because we're talking about a couple chapters here, is to basically first go to the instructor guidance, because I give you a hypothetical example of how to answer the question. For example, about how you can find different strengths and weaknesses of different approaches of realism, liberalism, and the identity perspective. Tells you what are some possible things you might see as strengths and weaknesses, and sort of how you can provide evidence and reasoning for it. And you see that in those chapters. And at the end, I also give you an example of how you could argue that one of them. Now, in this case, I gave the example of the identity perspective. That actually isn't my personal view, and that doesn't have to be a view. You could pick realism or liberalism, but it's important that you read that to get an idea of how to answer the question and the sort of things I'm looking for and not. Then we get to assignment 1, and this deals with things such as theory, arms races, and the prisoner's dilemma. And in this case, here's how I sort of outline this, okay? First off, I give you examples of how realists would look at the conflict between the United States and China. I also give you I point out where you can look for background of the prisoner's dilemma. And I give you an example of it in terms of a classic example. Same thing with liberals, how they look at things. And then I also give you an example of the identity perspective. And from there, what I do, and this is important, I take the prisoner's dilemma, and I give an explanation of the prisoner's dilemma, and then I try to relate it to the security dilemma between China and the United States. This is very important to read. The subheading that says the prisoner's dilemma as it relates to the security dilemma between China and the United States is very important, because it helps give you an idea of what the prisoner's dilemma is and how it can be related to the security concerns between the United States and China. Okay, so that's a very important heading there if you have issues or questions about how the prisoner's dilemma works and how to relate it to China and the United States. Also, I even go into the Bitzinger Foreign Affairs article, and I give you different perspectives on it, so that how you can look in terms of how you can think about it, in terms of what the Bitzinger article says, and how it argues. And that way you can take what you've learned about realism and liberalism and the identity perspective and try to relate and tie it to the Bitzinger article. And there is one final thing. This is also important, okay? So you might have difficulty accessing the Bitzinger article by itself through the links. They might ask you to join a page or not, I'm not sure. So what I've done is I've included a copy of it that you can go to and read, so that you don't have to go to a page and then find a paywall that blocks you, because it's with Foreign Affairs, which is a prestigious website, but you might have difficulty normally accessing it. You can access it through the Ashford Library because they have a subscription, but I thought I'd make it extra easy for you by basically attaching the Bitzinger article both here, which I'm about to do, both to the instructor guidance, and having its own special announcement for it. Okay? Thank you. Bye.